If they want to believe the politicians, believe it. If it makes your world a little better, your day better, then go for it. But eventually you're going to open your eyes. Whether you want to or not, they are going to be open. And you're going to see what's going on.
You're listening to the Great Reassessment Podcast. Randy Walsh, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Matthew. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. We've been trying to schedule this for a couple weeks now, so I thank you for being flexible in your schedule, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I cannot wait to talk to you about the moon landing, the Apollo missions. It's a fascinating subject, and I think it's gained a bit of a resurgence in the since COVID, really, because people are really questioning what is truth. And would you agree with that? Do you think there's been a resurgence in people's interest in the moon landing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, actually, when I jumped into this several years ago, I knew that there was going to be, a lot of people are going to get upset, and it's going to be it's not a very how shall I say, it's not a walk in the park, right? So I knew that going in. But especially, and you mentioned COVID, especially in the last 5 years, I think a lot more people are receptive to the idea of at least taking another look at this, or another look at issues like this and subjects of conspiracies, whatever, you'd like to call it. But I think COVID definitely opened a lot of people's eyes. I sort of was there before that, but I really appreciate now where we're at in terms of the awareness more on a mass scale, a global scale, because I actually think we're better now, in a better position now than where we were, let's say, 10 years ago, because at least people are now having this conversation and they're asking questions.
Yeah, definitely. That's what 2020 through 2024 really taught people, was because they were pushed to a level of compliance that, normally with shifting baseline theory, it's kind of like the boiling frog. The frog doesn't really know it's boiling if it's incremental and it's happens over a slow process. But when you make a jump that's too quick, you really alert people to what's going on. Yeah. And I think that's what's kind of happened. The jump was a little too quick and a little too far. I think it's made, we'll use the word government, because that's, what's behind a lot of this is, governments around the world sort of collaborating to control people. And, we know there's real efforts to brainwash and, with marketing and convincing people, about what is truth. They don't want people questioning certain things. And I'm a pretty contrarian by my nature. And so I can't wait to talk about a lot of this. But before we get into that, I kind of want to just get to know you a little bit more as a person. Where did you grow up? What were you into as a kid? And what made you well poised to begin to question the moon landing to the degree that you have?
Yeah. So just a little brief history. I don't go into long-winded backgrounds and all that, because I know that kind of annoys me when people do that, and so I try not to do it. So I'll briefly say I was born in Ireland. I left Ireland when I was 7 years old. We emigrated to Canada, so I spent most of my life here in Canada. And, I had, what could be classified as a normal upbringing, to a point where, eventually, my parents separated and then divorced, so kind of went a little sideways, but it was conventional by any other means. And I'm looking back on that situation now, and I'm wondering if that gave me the ability to open my mind and to see things that a lot of people at that time weren't seeing. My real awakening really kind of happened in my 20s, when I started reading about the JFK assassination and realizing that, what we're being told wasn't the truth, if I could put it that way. In a lot of cases, it was a lie. You reach a point where you grow up trusting these officials, only to find out that these officials are the last people you want to trust. So it kind of started from there. And it wasn't until it was in my early 30s when I started a flying career, and I was looking into, and I always had by the way, I'm old enough to remember the Apollo 11 launch. I actually watched it live, and we were in school when they launched. I mean, we were brought down to a big gymnasium in school to watch the launch of Apollo 11 on that July summer's day. Excuse me. And so I grew up I grew up with the Apollo program. I grew up with these astronauts being my hero, as a child right into adulthood. It wasn't until in my mid 30s that I saw an episode on A&E. Now, A&E back then was far different than what it is now. A&E was a very good documentary channel, and they happened to be running a documentary one night when I came home on the Apollo missions, and they were specifically talking about Apollo 13. And they were talking about the accident that happened on the way to the moon. According to the narrative, they blew an oxygen tank, and they risked being stranded and marooned in the elliptical orbit for eternity. So they had to use the lunar module engine, not the command module engine. Big difference there. When you get into the details, you'll understand why. But you had to use the lunar module engine to as a slingshot. They had to swing around the dark side of the moon and then use that as a slingshot to get back. So I was listening to all this, and I was thinking, yeah, right? I know that, right? But it was something very interesting that the commander of Apollo 13, Jim Lovell, said in the documentary, and this really caught my attention. He was talking about how they had to fire up the engines, but they had no computer because the command service module was shut down because it was badly damaged. So they were relying on a backup computer in the lunar module. And remember, they were attached, right? So they were using that, and that was a far less powerful computer. Nowhere near as comprehensive as the other computer, and even that in and of itself wasn't comprehensive at all. There was a lot of manual input that was required. So I remember him saying that he turned to his colleague and said, "No, when I fire the engine, no matter what you do, keep the Earth within a grid pattern on the window." He was talking about the optics, actually, right? And it hit me that they're 150,000 miles out, and they're flying visual. They're using visual cues to navigate back to Earth. And I remember thinking as a pilot, the limited experience I had at that time, how impossible that would have been. You would need a very sophisticated computer that is reading star maps every second to update the telemetry to keep that spaceship on course. And that was my first real moment when I started questioning the Apollo moon missions. That for me was where it started.
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to ask you that. And you've written 3 books. 2 are works nonfictions. You got the Apollo moon missions, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight, part 1, and there's a part 2, and then you have a fiction work which is called Between the Lies, and I've heard you talk about that on other podcasts, and I'll put links to those in the show notes. I have not read them yet, I will admit, but we kind of scheduled this pretty quickly, but I'm going to get into them. But for somebody who is a skeptic, or let's just say their baseline, they believe what they've been told, they believe in the moon landing, where do you think the easiest place to start is if you were to try to convince somebody, or at least raise a significant amount of skepticism? Where do you start?
I think the easiest place to start is to look at the evidence. And when I say look at the evidence, I'm looking at the evidence that no longer exists. And NASA is on record, and so are many of the corporations that were working with NASA in destroying millions of documents related to the Apollo mission. So we're talking about millions of documents related to the lunar module, to the Saturn V, to the command module. We're talking about what is being billed as NASA's as the most the scientific achievement of the 20th century. And I mean, if that is the scientific achievement of this 20th century, you think that everything would have been, a great care would have been taken and resources spent to protect all this evidence. That's where I would start. Look at the evidence. Look at the evidence for the Saturn V rocket. Saturn V rocket, millions of documents related to that have been destroyed. People will argue that there's schematics. No, you don't. You need more than schematics. You need those millions of documents that the engineers themselves had written to augment those, little changes that had to be made here and there. All those notes have been destroyed. Engineers themselves who worked on the Apollo missions have admitted that, right? I read, and I put this in my first book, a space historian who is pro Apollo missions. I mean, he believes everything that he's being told, and he himself admits that all these documents have been destroyed. And if you go down to Florida to the Space Museum and look up the Saturn V on microfilm, he admits that there are huge gaps within that microfilm. So that's where I would start, is why is all this, number one, information related to the Apollo mission scattered all over the country? Why isn't it in one warehouse, guarded, under lock and key, with the latest technology, security-wise, to protect it? No, it's not. It's scattered all over the country, and on top of that, millions of documents have been destroyed. And most importantly, and this came out back in 2009 when Director Ron Howard was working on doing a 40th anniversary to commemorate the Apollo moon landing, Apollo 11 specifically, because that was the 40th anniversary. And very interesting story. He had gone to NASA and asked for the telemetry tapes. Because what he wanted to do, which I thought was ingenious, he wanted to take that telemetry tape. He needed the visual live feed, the video that we all see from the lunar surface. He needed that in order to blow it up to IMAX, which that's what I would do. If I was a director, that's what I'd want to do. I want to get the ultimate visual for for the most scientific achievement of the 20th century, only to be politely told by NASA that those telemetry tapes have been destroyed, no longer exist. And not only for Apollo 11, but for all of the Apollo missions. And for anybody out there that wants to come back at me, and I've heard this argument many times, and says, no, they found the tapes. They did not find the tapes. They found a copy, a first generation of the original. The original telemetry tapes have been destroyed. And with that is of course, the live visual feed you would have seen from the lunar surface, the telemetry for the spacecraft, and the medical information for the Apollo astronauts. But most importantly, I want to focus on the telemetry, because the telemetry gives you all the data for everything that was a readout from everything that was on board the Saturn V rocket itself. So all the engines, all the thrust, everything would have been on that telemetry data, and that telemetry data has been destroyed. And one more thing I'll add before I finish here is we're not talking digital technology here. We're talking analog. And that analog is, give me a second here. I'm powering up.
No, you're good.
Yeah, there we go. Good. Just almost, my battery was running low here, so I finally caught that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I was talking about, telemetry tapes. So the all of that information would have been on that. So what NASA will tell you is just that they have printouts, but they have nothing to back up that printout data. Right, you have to rely on NASA telling you that you have to put your faith in NASA that that telemetry data is for real. But they've destroyed the evidence, and we're talking 140,000 reels of telemetry tapes that have been destroyed. Now, to give you an example, one reel has about 15 minutes of information on it. This is analog information, and it's about the size of an average car steering wheel. So put that in perspective. How did you lose 140,000 reels of telemetry tapes?
Yeah, so I have heard you mention that on a previous podcast, and that is really suspicious. Now, ChatGPT and Google all told me that during the late 60s and 1970s, there was a huge tape shortage, and so they had to recycle and film over different tapes. But it began, I started to think, if you had a prized possession, right? And there was a shortage of whatever material that was. Say it was a family heirloom. Would you ever repurpose a prized possession, even if there was a shortage? I don't think I would do that. You would want to preserve this because eventually the shortage will get figured out. But this prized possession, this proof, will never be able to be recovered. So I don't really buy the film shortage thing.
No, no, and of course we all trust Google, right?
Yeah.
So and what people need to realize is that Chat GPT and whatnot is programmed by humans, right? So we have
Mm-hmm.
that factored in as well. And interesting, when you actually do a deeper dive on the missing, they call it the missing telemetry tapes, you find out that NASA signed out these tapes. That's on record. NASA signed out these tapes in the early 1970s, all right, from the archives. Now, NASA didn't go through itself the proper protocols in signing out these tapes. So we don't know specifically who signed the tapes out, but we do know that NASA signed them out. That much is there, right? The tape shortage didn't happen until the early mid 1980s.
Hmm.
So NASA's own excuse falls flat.
Yeah, that's a good. So it wasn't until the 80s, you say?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Next point that is often brought up is, people ask the question, why haven't we gone back to the moon? And one of the answers you get from average people is that they say, well, we have no purpose. We have no purpose to go back to the moon. What purpose would it serve? There's nothing to do. How do you answer that?
Yeah, that's a very easy answer. If you're talking about manned missions, why not? Why wouldn't you put moon missions as a priority? For number one, you cannot. There's a limit to what you can launch from Earth. Okay, Saturn V was, I believe, it was a 3,000-ton rocket. That's the size of an average military destroyer at sea. Okay, you can't you can build something bigger than that, but you're risking catastrophic events if that thing were to explode on launch. So there is a limit to what we can launch. If you're talking about launching a mission to Mars, would you want to launch from the surface of the moon? Wouldn't that be a much better place where you don't need as much energy, you don't need as much weightlifting thrust? You have a base there. For people that say that, it just amazes me that, see, they're not thinking ahead. You see, the problem with these officials is that they're clever, but they're not smart, right? They never think long term. And then, you and I, Joe Average, we come along and we say, well, what about long term? What about a mission to Mars? Right now, you do not have the apparatus in Earth orbit, let alone on the lunar surface, to launch a manned mission to Mars. All right. So that would be my first response. My answer to that question is that you would need to have a whole apparatus in Earth orbit and in lunar orbit, and the capability to launch either from a platform in orbit around the Earth or a platform from the lunar surface or in lunar orbit as a launching pad to launch missions to Mars, which is never going to happen, by the way, with this technology. It's just not going to happen, right? And I want to back up a little bit here because if we're talking about just go back 50 years to the lunar missions, you would have had needed all of that apparatus in place in low Earth orbit to actually successfully launch a manned mission to the moon and back with this level of technology. I mean, we're talking back then, and realistically speaking, you're probably talking in the trillions of dollars just to get that platform into low Earth orbit and to get it working and to train the people, thousands of people that would be needed, astronauts, to keep that functioning while you have another segment of engineers working on launching capabilities from that platform to the moon. That's just to land a manned mission on the moon. I'm not talking about all manned missions. I just want to clarify that. I'm just talking about manned missions. So when you look at what's really involved in complexity, NASA spent equivalent to, let's see, I think it was equivalent to about $250 billion in today's value. Realistically speaking, to get to the moon and back, just with our technology, I'm not talking about future technology, we're probably looking at a minimum 1.5 trillion. That's an educated guess. So, in answer to your question, yeah, to launch a mission to Mars, but we haven't even gotten to the moon. Look what it would take just to get to the moon alone. So when people ask, well, why haven't we gone back? There's no need to. I've heard people say we've been there, done that. Is that really a human response? You look at our technology going back to the early 1920s, propeller-driven aircraft, and then, it went to jet, and then it went to supersonic. We've made a lot of advancements when it comes to aviation, and we've actually gone backwards when it comes to space technology. Actually, the irony is that it's all inverted because the technology that we're using 50 years ago apparently worked really well, almost perfectly, but today we have trouble still getting launching a rocket off the surface. I mean, look at the everybody holds their breath when there's a launch. You don't hold your breath when an airplane takes off, but you hold your breath when there's a launch. We're talking decades and decades and decades of supposed research and experience, and still we can barely get a rocket off Earth's surface, let alone anywhere else.
I think I heard you mention on another podcast. Name one thing in terms of like technology from 1969 that today is not cheaper and faster to build. Like technology is sort of naturally deflationary. And why is it that there's like this one area where we haven't really advanced at all?
Yeah. And people will argue that while digital technology came out of the Apollo Moon program, I would answer that with a yes and no. Digital technology was used in the first time it was used. Actually, the military has been using digital technology in some form since the 1950s. It was in the mid 1960s to up until the launch of the Apollo missions. They were using the LLTV. That's the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle, and that was an all-digital vehicle that they were using to train the astronauts. But that digital technology was already out before. And that digital technology would have been incorporated eventually into their technology. They're using the Apollo missions as saying that was a platform. When in actuality, no, it's not, because I believe that the Concorde was using it as well, right? Digital technology. So, and there's one other thing that I want to point out is that people will say to me, well, we destroyed all those documents because we don't need them anymore, because it's we've been there, done that, and so on. And they'll say you don't keep a document for the old Douglas DC-3, that twin engine prop back in the 1930s, 1940s, a military workhorse transporting troops around. Well, the reason why we don't keep those documents is because we have since then built on that technology. So there's no need to keep those documents. But we have not built on the technology that was used to land missions on the moon. Now, people will argue the space shuttle, but the space shuttle went no further than low Earth orbit. All right. But we haven't specifically built on that technology that was used to land man on the moon. So therefore, why would you destroy something you haven't built on? You should be keeping that, if anything, for posterity. And we see that the opposite.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let me ask you this, because this is one of the areas that I am incredibly skeptical on. And I just want to acknowledge that, like, I'm not coming at this like a clean slate. I have my own biases and I'm naturally contrarian. But the thing that really gets me is, like, how do you do a live broadcast from the surface of the moon with nothing but like a lunar lander, and you're 400,000 miles away? This is being broadcast on television for the entire world to see. And you have a live conversation with the President of the United States. I want to ask you, is something like that even possible?
Sure, from a studio. I mean, it's possible if the missions were recorded from a studio. First of all, I mean, I wrote about the technical aspect of this in my first book. And supposedly they had three positions, three satellites on Earth that were reading telemetry from the moon 24 hours a day. So, if you only have two satellites, two, what do you call that? When you point up the dish there, I forget right now.
Hmm.
Yeah, you know what I mean, right? And they pick up signal. You can't pick up the signal 24 hours because of the rotation of the Earth, right? So they had one based in California, one based in two in California, I believe, or one based in Australia. And so they were using that to say that we were getting live visual feed from the lunar surface. But when you actually look at it, it was never live. There was like a minute and a half gap because they had to supposedly send that signal back to Earth, and they had to download that signal and then send it back up to satellite, bounce it off a satellite back down to Houston, and then Houston would send it out live. And on top of that, they didn't send that signal out live. They put a CBS camera right on the viewing screen in NASA, and that's what we saw, right?
Mm.
So that in itself tells you a lot. And I believe the reason why they did that is because they didn't have the lunar surface replicated as fully as they wanted to at that time until they got to Apollo 12, by the way, the next mission. There was no visual feed from the moon because apparently, according to the official version, one of the astronauts had turned the camera to the sun and burned out the lens. So they had to, and 13, of course, wasn't there because 13 never landed on the moon. So it wasn't until Apollo 14 when you had actual, from Apollo 11 to 14, when you had the actual live video feed clearer this time. And I believe that the reason why this time it was supposed to be a signal that was sent directly to the camera, wasn't a camera pointed at the screen, unlike Apollo 11 where they pointed the camera at the screen. So my point is that I believe they did that purposely and made it fuzzy because they didn't have all the details correct. They were trying to create a ghost effect in order to hide the fact that they hadn't really perfected the lunar surface to their specifications in order to greater fool the public. So better than showing a really good quality video from Apollo 11, they purposely showed a poor quality until they perfected the
Yeah.
set. And as for the phone call, I mean, even back then they were able to bounce signals off satellites. Whether they could actually do a phone conversation, I highly doubt it, especially from the surface of the moon. But again, one important point to make here is that they have technology, recording technology, and communications technology back then is still classified. And it's also important to note that, excuse me, that at the time, the military, of course, was heavily involved in the Apollo moon missions, even though NASA technically was and is a civilian space station, but it's run by military, right? And all of the astronauts, I think except one, the Apollo astronauts, were all military. So if you have military personnel involved, you have the military hierarchy involved. And the military had the most sophisticated, largest film studios in the world that even dwarfed Hollywood.
Hmm. That's interesting. I don't know if you've seen the exchange between Joe Rogan and Matt Walsh on the moon landing. Joe Rogan's talked about the moon landing a bunch on his podcast, but have you seen the bit between him and Matt Walsh?
I've seen a lot, Joe Rogan. You'll have to refresh my memory on that one.
Yeah, so they got into it, and they're talking about how Joe Rogan, he was talking about a bit he used to do in comedy, saying, before and after COVID, I would have told you that vaccines are the most important thing, and now I came out of it thinking I don't even think we went to the damn moon. And they were talking about that bit, and it started a discussion about the moon landing, and of course Matt Walsh believes it's the greatest human achievement of all time. And Joe Rogan, I think he's somewhat agnostic on the topic. I think he's really gone down the rabbit hole when it comes to the moon landing, and he knows a lot about kind of the stuff you're talking about. He'll talk about the Van Allen radiation belts, the conditions of space travel, the missing tapes, talking about the Saturn V rocket, and just a lot of the things that poke holes or just that are incredibly suspicious. And, Matt Walsh, he said, okay, if you're going to posit that we did not go to the moon, now you have the burden of proof. You have to prove that an entire different event took place, which is faking the moon landing. Which, to get that type of coordination from an entire organization, you're assuming that there's thousands of people who have their fingerprints all over this mission, right? How do you get them to all cooperate and have no whistleblowers? And I mean, because it would still be almost Sisyphean endeavor to fake the moon landing and have nobody come out by this point with just irrefutable proof. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and I'm always prepared for people like Matt Walsh. He's controlled. Number one, he's controlled. He's scripted. He has certain talking points that he has to adhere to. So I understand why he says that. But in answer to his question, I'm going to answer. I have a few answers here I'd like to get into. Number one, no, the onus is on him to prove it. The onus is not on us. The onus is on him. The onus is on him to come back and say, but here's this and here's this. And I come back and I say, but that's gone and that's gone. So you have to prove to me. The onus is always on them. They're the ones that started this. They're the ones that funded this at taxpayers' expense. They're the ones that sold this crap to the American people and the world. They're the ones that have to explain it, and they're the ones that constantly have to defend this. So when Matt Walsh says, and others like him say, that it's the onus is on us, no, it's not on us. We're the taxpayers. We're the average Joe out there. The onus is on you. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is when, and I've heard this before, when he says that thousands of people, were involved in this, hundreds of thousands actually were involved in this. So about 400,000 people were involved in this. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. Let's get that on the table right now. 400,000 plus people were involved in this. But he makes it sound like, and this is why people like him will not talk to me, right? Because I can throw it right back at him, because he makes it sound like they were all under the same roof, right? No, they weren't. We're talking 6 major corporations that were involved in the Apollo moon missions. That's the first thing. Then there's 20,000, an estimated 20,000 subcontractors that were involved with those 6 major corporations. So you had 6 major contractors, Boeing, North American being 2 of them, Grumman being 3, Grumman as well, and 20,000 scattered throughout the whole country. So how does someone know a particular part that they're working on for the lunar module 2,000 miles away from NASA? How does that person who's hired to do a job, he's there from 9 to 5, he's an engineer, he's on the floor, he's making this part, how does he know that part got into space? Is he privy to the hierarchy of management when it comes to NASA? No, he's not. It's like anybody working for a corporation. Everybody has a need-to-know basis. That's how it works. It's compartmentalized. All right? You don't know what the CEO and the board of directors are talking about. You don't know what their long-term goal is. You only know what you have to do in your cubicle. And that's exactly the analogy I use when it comes to the Apollo missions. So when he says people would have spoken, well, the fact of the matter is people have spoken. And people have spoken up, and they try to get their message out. One of them, an early pioneer of this, of course, was Bill Kaysing. And Bill Kaysing, they have gone through great lengths to denigrate that man, to discredit him as much as possible. But he worked for Rocketdyne, which was another of the corporations that built the F-1 engines for the Apollo missions. And he noticed that they were falsifying that data. And he came forward after he resigned. He worked there from 1958 to 1963, and those engines that Rocketdyne was working at that time were specifically for the Saturn V rocket. Without those F-1 engines in the Saturn V rocket, you would have no Apollo missions. He came out and he resigned in 1963 in disgust because he noticed. And people say he was just there to read documents. Well, hell, he was hired by Rocketdyne, so obviously they thought he was qualified, and he could read data, and the data was telling him that they were falsifying the thrust output of the F-1 engines. If that's true, and I believe it is, then that means there was no Apollo moon missions on that basis alone. Because if you don't have the thrust vector to get the missions off the ground, you have no Apollo missions, right? So that's one example. And of course, he wrote his book in 1977. And then, as for any other whistleblowers, try getting this information on CNN or Fox News or any of those other control sites. Try that. You're not going to get anywhere near the mainstream media because the mainstream media has been bought out. It's been bought out for decades. It's owned by corporations. People know this, but they still scoff at it. But it's a fact. The same corporations that were telling you that we went to the moon because we built the technology are the same corporations that own the very communications network that edits and screens everything you read and hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Joe Rogan brought up a really good point that the 1960s were a time of incredible deception coming from the government. You had them, you had the whole JFK, right? And we still don't know all the whole truth about that. And there was a lot of deception and lying coming through the government. And that was during a time when the internet was not available for people to publish their opinions without anybody's permission. So there wasn't really an outlet for whistleblowers like there is today. Because right now you can get on X and you can have an anonymous account and there's things like WikiLeaks and you can leak things to independent journalists that have big audiences. So I don't know if you could pull something off like that today in the same way, but back then when everything's just written on paper, who's to say you couldn't?
It's right. I mean, when you had the launch of Apollo 11, you had cameras watching the launch. So people say, well, there was millions of people there watching that, or there was a couple of million people at the Apollo 11 launch site. It got fewer and fewer as the years went by for the next launches, but go with Apollo 11. Yes, that's right. We saw that rocket lift off. First of all, we don't know if that rocket was using the actual engines that were necessary for the Apollo missions. We don't know that. Anybody can tell you that, but you don't know. We don't know. A rocket, to me, when I say a rocket blasting, it sounds the same as any other rocket. So how would we know? Number one. Number two, once that rocket was out of camera range, which is about 40 miles altitude and about 40, 50 miles, distance-wise as well, it's out of camera range. So we had CBS and Walter Cronkite narrating the rest of the mission from there. And they were using cartoons or, graphics to tell us what was going on. So as you say, it was on paper, or we were being told by the mainstream media what was happening. So nobody knows what happened after that point. Nobody knows that the Saturn V rocket actually went into the Atlantic Ocean after launch, which is what I think happened, right? Nobody knows that because we didn't see it. But now, as you say, we have all these different platforms and we have digital platforms and it's all interconnected. See, these people who run the world, again, they're clever but not smart. They come up with really great ideas, but they're not long-term thinkers, right? So the internet that they came out with when they developed that backfired on them because it's become a platform. We've been using that as a weapon back against them, right? But they're in a catch-22 situation because they need that in order to run their world. But we've now been able to use it to our benefit. So Marcus Allen's been asked this question a few times, will they ever fake another Apollo mission? And he says no, because of what you just said yourself, Matthew, is because we have the ability now to look further and to ask more questions and to get that information out. And he's right. I agree with him. That's why they haven't faked another mission right now. And any mission they send, I mean, the last mission they sent to Artemis, which is the latest Apollo version of the Apollo missions. They supposedly sent, I think it was 2 missions. I haven't been following too clearly. I know there was one they sent through the Van Allen radiation belts, and they've classified all that data. Why are they classifying that data? Why? I don't understand. We've been there, done that 50 years ago, and here you are classifying this data. So it makes no sense to anybody. Just use your common sense, people. That's all I'm asking. I'm not telling anybody what to think. I'm asking people just ask questions, right? If they just sent this Artemis, I believe, a year ago through the Van Allen belts and back, and they classified the information. So why are they classifying that? Well, I know why they're classifying that, because there's information there they don't want us to see. I mean, it's not rocket science to figure that out. If there was nothing to hide, why not release the data, right? So it's the little things like that that really add up.
Yeah.
And as we said at the beginning, with COVID, which was another a controlled, global controlled event, by the way. I don't know anybody. I just don't know how people bought into it. But it opened people's eyes. Even people who bought into it at the time, Matthew, are now looking back and questioning that. And because of that, now they're questioning everything else. You mentioned the JFK assassination. Yeah, that was my first foray into this whole idea. And I also want to bring out one other point, that it was because of the JFK assassination and the Warren report that we now have the term conspiracy theory, which was put together and invented by the CIA. They put that into all, because the CIA, it's no secret that they've infiltrated the mainstream media for the last several decades, and they were instructing journalists to use the term conspiracy theorists to discredit any of those who dared to question the Warren report. So when people call you a conspiracy theorist, wear it as a badge of honor. I get called that all the time, and I wear it as a badge of honor. I think I'm a conspiracy realist. But conspiracy theorists, it's a badge of honor because your CIA program is working really well. Ha, ha, ha. The joke is on you. Wake up.
Yeah. It's tough. It's really tough because at the end of the day, what do we do if they did or they didn't? I try to, I think we have to live somewhat balanced, that it would be an event of incredible deception. It would highlight a lot of things that everyone believes is true already. But what would we do tomorrow? Like, do you think, why do you think this matters?
Specifically for the Apollo missions or telling the truth?
Let's go with the moon landing.
Yeah, well, let's put it in as part and parcel to a greater agenda of what's going on. I mean, you mentioned it yourself. You alluded to that. You mentioned what Joe Rogan said about the 1960s. I'll argue was going on before then, right? The deception. It's been one deception after another. And look what it's done to our society today. Look at the erosion of trust. Right? Sure, there's a lot of people that are going to be very upset because they have this emotional attachment to the Apollo moon missions, more so than any other conspiracy. This one seems to really grab people, and it seems to be a very heated subject for a lot of people. I get that. I understand that, right? I don't argue with people. If they want to believe the Apollo missions, believe it. If it makes your world a little better, your day better, then go for it. But eventually you're going to open your eyes, whether you want to or not. They are going to be open. And you're going to see what's going on. I mean, it matters because of this erosion in trust, right? And it matters because of what they tried to pull on us in the last 5 years. If people hadn't realized 10 years ago, enough people, that the Apollo moon missions were faked, there's no way in hell global leadership would have gotten away with hoisting this pandemic on us in the last 5 years. And this is why I really think it's important, because we're not being ruled by sane people. And I echo John Lennon's view on this. We're being run by insane people for insane purposes. And I think now people are finally seeing that. When you see the John Lennons out there telling us and warning us over this for the last 50 years, people are laughing, and now they're saying, he's right. So this is why it's important. Specifically for this one alone, we need to, you know what? I'm not against America. I'm a big fan of the way American society runs. I like the U.S. Constitution. I wish we had this here in Canada. You do have, for all your problems down in America, you have a lot more freedom of choice and freedom of speech and freedom of movement than we do up here in communist Canada. I mean, I like the Canadian way of life, but I also realize what it means. I really like the U.S. Constitution. I really like the fact that people can say these things down there. But it's not a black mark on Americans that the Apollo moon missions were faked. It's not at all, in my opinion. It's not. And then a lot of Americans themselves want this out in the open. They want it exposed because aside from all the the conspiracies that have happened in America, there's been a lot of good things that country has done too. And there's been a lot of good things Americans have done. So I don't want to take away from that, right? I'm just pointing out that this Apollo mission didn't just affect Americans, it affected the world. And exposing it can only be for the benefit of mankind, all of us, because then it exposes the corrupt and insane people that are trying to destroy our lives, not run our lives, destroy our lives. But we're resilient people. I always like to put a positive look on this. We're very resilient. There's 8 billion of us now. They're not succeeding, and they're not going to succeed. And I have no fear of them anymore. All right? I have no fear standing up to these people anymore. I'm not talking violently. I'm just talking, as a man with my opinions and the ability to say yes or no. Right? So, and they are losing. They've lost the narrative. They've lost the trust of the people. Look what happened up here in Canada just recently. I was actually quite impressed. Air Canada flight attendants went on strike. 2 days later, the Liberal government, who's supposed to be all for the people and all for the working class, legislated them back to work as usual. So much for your individual rights. They defied the order. They stood their ground. Air Canada is the biggest airline in the country. They defied the order. They were willing to go to jail. They were willing to take the fines, and the government backed off. They found a deal because they sensed that the rest of the country was going to strike and go with them. Very much like the trucker convoy, right? Those are good moments. Those are very good moments. And it gives me hope when I get up in the morning and I see that sun come up, and I don't want to sound corny here, but I see the sun come up and I think about what the trucker convoys have done. I think about the people in America that are standing up for themselves. I think about some of the people, not all, some of them are grifters on Rumble, but some of them on Rumble are really trying to get the truth out and are succeeding, and the narrative has fallen. And, and because the narrative has fallen, people are now taking back their autonomy. And we're seeing it now happening more and more and more every day. These are very exciting times. 2025, this is the moment I've been waiting for all my life.
Awesome. You hear people say, the roaring 20s are back, baby.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
We're sort of forging our own path. And this is akin to an awakening of some sort. Maybe a renaissance, not of art and literature, but a renaissance of self-didacts, you could say. And I can't think of anything negative that comes from people just thinking for themselves. Why do we have to accept narratives that were just given to us by people who get to write the history? The people who have the funding to pay for the textbooks that we read in schools and that children will be reading. And all of that is insanely corrupt. Like if you look at the state of public education, it's completely swamped with money, unions, book publishers. There's government intertwined in there with this whole mass schooling. And so as soon as somebody can just exit that system and begin to think for themselves, why is that so off-putting for some people? And it's very interesting that you're not looked at like you're some crazy person anymore when you just begin to question a lot of these things that are taken for granted. So, the moon mission might not affect your day-to-day life, but there beneath all of that, like you said, is this: does the government and these three-letter agencies that influence society and control society, will they be able to get away with things like this in the future? Yeah. And maybe that's where it does become relevant, because you're still alive, you still have a beating heart, and you still have to raise a family in this new world. And is it going to be governed by lies and deception, or is the truth going to reign?
And I like the analogy you used with the Renaissance and the Roaring Twenties, because what's happening today, it isn't just the painters and the musicians and the creative people who are making a change. It's the plumber and the electrician and the truck driver and the bus driver and the taxi driver. They're the ones that are making they're the ones that are changing things. They're the ones that are standing up. They're the ones that are doing it for everyone. And it is everybody in all walks of life that are doing this for people. They're doing it for themselves, they're doing it for families, and they're doing it for the next door neighbor, right? And this is where I think it's the greatest time in history, because we're not just looking at Michelangelo anymore. We're looking at the electrician, my next door neighbor. Look what he did. Look how he stood up for what he believed in, right? And look at the domino effect that that's having on many other people. And that's what scares the globalists. That's what scares the leadership. They're frightened of the fact they are terrified of us. They're terrified of us, not so much that we're going to lynch them, but they're terrified of us because we are developing what we've always had, but we've suppressed for decades. I would argue actually for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, the ability to think for ourselves, the ability to ask the questions, the ability to, it's not having the answer, it's just asking the questions. That's the key to knowledge, is asking the questions. And that's what people are doing. And that's what people are starting to do now here in Canada. And we're seeing it now in places around the world. They're not going to get it back. It's going to take decades, but we're over it. That is behind us. We have a lot of work to do, but it's going to become one where, and I'm not saying it's going to be, we're going to be holding hands and singing spiritual songs. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is that the individual is going to reign and decide for themselves, not some highfalutin, millionaire, connected, WEF-controlled politician is going to do it for us. That's just not working anymore. They're not getting their pandemic. They've been trying for the last 2 years to get another pandemic going. People are not buying it, right? They're not getting their vaccine crap selling anymore. People are not buying it. People are not taking it. It's down about, I think the uptake is about 15%. They're not getting it. That says a lot, right? They're not getting their climate lockdowns anymore. They're trying it here in Canada. Look at the opposition that they got. They got a lot of pushback here. They're not getting that. That tells me that it's not just the Michelangelos out there that are waking up. It is the electrician who's waking up too, right? And that's the good part about this.
Yeah. Maybe you could call it a renaissance of courage.
Yes. And people of all walks of life. You've made your statement. You are the orchestra. You're the conductor and you're the player.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wonderful note, an inspiring note to end on. And really just the big takeaway is I don't want to tell anybody what to believe necessarily, and people need to, I think it's good to go in with a healthy skepticism to most things, but you bring up a lot of good points. I wish we could go deeper. In your books, I've heard you talk about dozens and dozens of other oddities that don't really, as the English say, come up to scratch. And in your books. And so I'm going to order one of them myself, but I'll put these in the show notes. And if people are interested, you do a lot of writing. People should Google your name on, type it in on Spotify. You're on a lot of other podcasts, and I think you have something worthy to listen to. And so I hope people found this entertaining, but also insightful, and can be inspired by the call and the charge to ask the right questions, maybe not the right answers to have them, but to ask the right questions. And it's really a way of life to approach everything with that sort of mentality. And do you want to be freer and live in the truth, or are you content with just being spoon-fed everything? And so, Randy Walsh, thank you so much. May the Lord richly bless you and keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And I really enjoyed it today. And maybe at some point in the future, we can do it again. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.